Welcome to the Hastings Shadmary Show.
I'm Andee Hastings.
And I'm Mali Shadmary.
Together, we own Hastings Shadmary, an Atlanta-based law firm specializing in family law.
This is a space where we talk all things family law and all topics that touch the area of family law, from divorce to custody to self-growth, personal empowerment, and more. We bring you the truth, from our wolf pack to yours. Hello, and welcome to the Hastings Shadmary Show. I'm Mali Shadmary.
I'm Andee Hastings.
And we are so excited to have you here today. We are going to be talking about a very interesting topic, and it is Domestic Relations Financial Affidavits, aka DRFAs. We're going to talk about what they are, some basics about them, some dangers that might surround them, and just let you feel a little more comfortable with the topic, because if you're involved in any kind of a family law case, you're going to hear about a DRFA. But before we get there, let's get to the program and do a check-in. Andee Hastings, are you a warrior or a diplomat today?
I'm a diplomat today. Okay. I'm definitely in problem-solving mode, which honestly we are when we're in warrior mode too. Mm-hmm. But we've just got several people right now that we're kind of shepherding through the final stages of the process, and so I'm just really focused on bringing them to conclusion in as kind of gentle a way as possible, under the circumstances of their situation. So that's my zone. What about you? Where are you? Warrior or diplomat, Mali?
This is a hard one for me today. So if you know about us, you know we're a mix of warriors and diplomats. We believe you can't really be a warrior if you're not a diplomat as well. You have to be able to analyze situations, analyze yourself, and really be able to make smart decisions not based on emotions. But then you have to have the warrior side of things where you're jumping in, you're an executor, you're going to close the deal, you're in there and you're confident. So with that in mind, I'm definitely more of a warrior right now, and it doesn't mean in a fighting sense. It means within a diplomatic, with a diplomatic hat on.
Right.
That's how we are right now. I don't have any huge trials coming up immediately. I've got a couple coming up though, and one's in about a month, another one in a couple months after that. So just kind of lying in wait, doing the prep I need to do. That's something I love, is being able to plan ahead. And I'm doing my prep. I'm going deep into my details so that when it is time to perform, it's going to just absolutely obliterate. So I'm just like a warrior that's kind of in the bushes right now, waiting to attack, making my plan, doing it very carefully and very calculated, which is something this one, Andee Hastings, has helped me hone over the years. And that's just, as I've matured as a lawyer, something I've gotten better at, and as just a woman in general. And yeah, I'm doing good. I've got my favorite lip gloss on. I've got my hot pink nails. I've got wild cavewoman hair, so you're welcome. Just training hard in the gym, being a dog mom, building muscle.
You're welcome.
Yeah, you're welcome, everybody. So why are you really here? You're here to have us discuss with you financial affidavits. So if you've been involved in family law cases, you've heard it before. We want to just familiarize you with it, make it not something that's so intimidating, and also educate you so that you don't screw it up. Because honestly, if a financial affidavit is screwed up, it could be debilitating to a case. And it could increase your legal costs immensely to have to undo mistakes that were done if it's done improperly from the beginning. It's very important you understand the basics and that you apply this if you're going to be doing a financial affidavit so that you have a cheaper case all around and can avoid some common mistakes. So Andee, talk to us about actually what is a DRFA and why do we need them?
So a DRFA is a very complicated, in a way, budget. It's just more detailed than your normal budget that we do for our households and that sort of thing. It captures your income, your assets and debts, your expenses in a very detailed way, personal expenses, household expenses, kids' expenses, and it's something that we use throughout the process, not only to examine assets for division, but also to make determinations regarding things like alimony, needs versus ability to pay, and that sort of thing. So it's something that guides us throughout the case. It's kind of that touchstone of your financials. And it doesn't mean your case, we won't also do a detailed marital balance sheet and that sort of thing, but it's the starting point for everything. And it's sworn, so it's got to be accurate.
So we'll get to the sworn part in a minute. So to add to what Andee said, a DRFA physically is, like she said, it's a budget, but it's a piece of paper. It's paper that you're going to fill out. Your lawyer's going to give it to you. They should give it to you at the very beginning of your case. That's something I like to get my clients working on immediately. I remember when I first started practicing law also, I was like, I need to do a DRFA because as Andee said, it's a budget. So what it does is it has a summary page on the front where it summarizes your income. And we'll talk about that. How do you even establish an income? What if you're not making an income right now? We'll talk about all that in a moment. And the summary page sort of just gives the judge a snapshot of what are these people's incomes? What's this person's income? What is their gross income versus their net? That's after taxes. What's your income that actually hits the bank account after taxes? So it analyzes gross versus net. We'll talk about that. It also gives a snapshot of what are your monthly expenses, and it will kind of separate out your expenses and what you put on credit cards. So it'll talk about expenses that you put on debt, a credit card debt, and also that you pay out of your bank account. We'll talk about that in a moment as well. And then after the first page where it kind of summarizes everything, the DRFA will go into more detail about how did we reach these summary numbers. It will go into detail about gross versus net income and if you get what other kinds of income, from stock.
Dividends,
investments,
self-employment income.
Yeah, Social Security, disability, those sorts of things. So all different types of income you're going to have to put on different line items on the DRFA. We get really specific about that. So we'll talk about that. And then it lets us go through and talk about all the assets and debts that you have, as well as everyday expenses. So this is a very detailed document, and your lawyer's going to help you do it. And it talks about everything from mortgage, or if you have rent, how much is your cable, your internet, all of that. So we'll talk about that. And then it talks about your debts. It has a page for that. So it's this document, like Andee said, that the court is going to use, and it is relevant to kind of everywhere in your case, anywhere from child support to alimony to equitable division. What do we do with the estate? To attorney's fees. And then, it applies to your overall truthfulness and credibility as well. So it is truly, I've spoken at least one CLE on DRFAs before, because that's a continuing legal education. And I remember talking about, and I felt so nerdy saying it, but I get to say it again. Can't wait to be a nerd. I believe that a DRFA is the heartbeat to a case, to most cases, and it's the crux of what we really need to be focusing on. And far too many times I see that attorneys do not focus on getting that right and getting in there from the beginning. They wait till too late. So your lawyer's going to give you this blank DRFA, and you're going to be like, oh my God, this is very difficult. And you're going to take a first stab at it. You're going to use the coaching we're going to give you to do that, and your lawyer will be there to help you. But Andee, you brought up a really good point. You said this is a sworn document. So talk to us a little bit about the Superior Court rule here in Georgia. Which one is it, 24.2? Mm-hmm. Uniform Superior Court Rule 24.2 has some kind of requirement. So talk to us a little bit about that.
So that's just the Superior Court rule that governs the preparation of domestic relations financial affidavits, and also the timeline of when they're required to be produced in cases. Certain counties have additional requirements and guidelines, but that's sort of the baseline for how we handle domestic relations financial affidavits. And it is an affidavit, which is what it sounds like. You have to attest to the truth and accuracy of the information that's contained in it.
Meaning it's sworn testimony. You sign, a notary stamps in front of you. What you put on this paper is true.
Yep.
So remember that. Very important to get it right the first time, because how many times, it's every single case.
Yes.
We get a DRFA from the other side with the person's signature and it's notarized, and they say they make this, all of their expenses are this, and then we go review all their bank statements, their pay documents, and it is nothing what their DRFA says. So what does that say? They notarized a legal document saying this is truthful, and it's not based on all the evidence that we're able to show. Boom, no more credibility. It's a very, very common mistake. So sorry, that attestation piece is huge.
It is huge, and I think that different lawyers handle it differently in cases, and as clients, they're relying on us to guide them. And sometimes lawyers will just have their clients fill it out by hand.
Oh, yeah.
They don't look at it.
Oh, yeah.
They just have them sign it, and then they're stuck with that. And what ends up happening as a practical matter in court is you can get cross-examined on it, which is what Mali was just talking about. Because if you've got an attorney on the other side who knows the details, then they're going to go through with documents and show why this sworn affidavit regarding your budget is inaccurate. And like Mali said, once your credibility is out the window, it's really hard to get it back. And there's other sort of guidelines that we use around, like, how often do we update it? When do we, provide one during the case outside of the required timelines? Because the more times you change it during the case, the more opportunities this other side has to cross-examine you. So if you do one real fast at the beginning and you just turn it over to the other side, and then you have to update it later and you turn that one over, then at trial they can put them all in front of you and be like, well, were you telling the truth then, or were you telling the truth now? And, it sounds a little dramatic, but it is something that happens. And so you have to be very strategic about it within the requirements of the Superior Court rules.
And it subjects you to attorney's fees, frivolous litigation fees, meaning the other side can seek fees against you if you drag this out by giving inaccurate information over and over again, especially the more high-end your case is. This becomes more and more important. For some of our most not high asset cases and really complicated income cases, we're going to involve a forensic accountant to help us finalize our DRFA before we ever show that to the other side. That's how serious it is. And Andee, you were talking about the courts having certain deadlines and all of this. It's important to note these affidavits, they actually don't get filed with the court. Things that get filed with the court, those are public record. So your income really we try to avoid putting that out there into the ether, into public record. So the DRFA itself is actually a discovery tool, meaning it's outside of the record, but it's evidence. And what you do is under the Superior Court rules, you have to file a certificate with the court that says we've provided the DRFA to the other side. You don't ever file the DRFA. That's a big mistake I see a lot of lawyers making, and it's just sloppy. And if I were the litigant, I would not want all of my financials out there like that. It's so intimate. So keep that in mind. And what happens is you provide the DRFA to the other side. And like Andee said, there's deadlines. It just depends on where you live. In Georgia, you have to give that DRFA to the other side at least 5 days prior to any mediation or hearing. We see people abuse that a lot. If you don't give it 5 days in advance before a hearing, you're risking potentially not being allowed to go forward with that hearing. The judge could continue your case. So very important you are timely with this. And if you want the most efficient outcome at a mediation or a hearing, you want the other side to have that information in advance. It could help prompt settlement. And so got to do it timely. And then in court, you do give the judge the financial affidavit as well. So the judge, that's one of the first things they like to see because they want to study it. From the minute, honestly, you start talking in court, they're going to want to start analyzing, what's the financial picture we're looking at here? Keep the fluff out of my face. Let me look at this affidavit. And it's also important to remember sort of our philosophy on a DRFA is when we bring anyone through litigation, it is our job here at Hastings Shadmary to help create a new future for someone. We are forward-facing. We aren't trying to keep focusing on the past. In order to do that, we need to look at a very realistic financial picture and be real about it so that we're not just playing games. The only way we can get you to closure and to a real finite new reality is to get it down on paper and really visualize it and make sure we're doing things that are realistic. I've had so many clients who truly have no idea what their expenses are, what their budget is. There's also situations where you don't know what your expenses are going to be when you are divorced. How do you do a DRFA when you don't know what your expenses are going to be? We're going to talk about that in a moment. So that's just a little bit about the philosophy is like you're creating this document. It is going to need to live and breathe with you throughout this case and in your future. It's very forward-facing. So let's talk about the specifics in a DRFA. The first one, so like we said, we'll summarize it for you one more time. Certain things are going to go in this DRFA. Income, we got to establish an income for you, number one. Number two, we need to list your assets and your debts. Number three, we need to talk about your expenses, and that'll include your credit card debt too. So let's talk about income. Can you tell us generally, how do we establish an income? If I was a client coming to you, what's the first step in filling out my income on a DRFA?
Generally, we start with tax returns. I mean, that's the easiest place to go is pull the tax returns, start to understand what type of income are the parties receiving? Is it W-2? That's a very easy thing to capture, relatively speaking, on a domestic relations financial affidavit. If we've got somebody who's self-employed, we're going to have to pull that information, pull the tax returns, and break it down in a very specific way on a domestic relations financial affidavit. Because again, the key is we want to make it as accurate as possible. If you earn bonuses, commissions, that sort of thing, we're going to need to pull that information specifically, document it appropriately, which always I feel makes clients nervous because they'll be like, last year was an outlier year.
Yes.
I got a bonus that's twice as much as what I would normally get. And so then we have to decide if it's appropriate. If we really do have an outlier year, do we average more than 1 year's worth of income? We have to note that if we do it, but generally we look at the previous year when we're delineating income on a DRFA.
Yeah.
But sometimes we'll do an average depending on the nature of the income. If it fluctuates wildly, it might be a more accurate representation to have an average over a couple of years as opposed to just the last year.
Yeah, I'm a proponent of averages. I find that judges really are as well for the most part. And, things like commissions, bonuses, we look at things like year-end pay stubs to help us differentiate. If you just have W-2 income where it combines a base and all your bonuses, well, we can compare that with pay stubs to really extract, because you have to be very specific on this DRFA. It'll say, what's your base, commissions, bonuses, and like we said, there's other components. If you have rental income, we need to, and I'll usually attach a schedule to my DRFA that will show, okay, rental income, here's how we calculated this. Because you receive rents, well, you've got all these expenses as well. We need to account for the expenses, so it can become complicated. So it's something that we need to really comb out carefully. Again, as Andee said, if you are a business owner, it becomes even more complicated. And then there are things like fringe benefits, and how do we account for that? If you're running your personal expenses through your business, how do we account for that? And that's going to be relevant to things like child support and alimony. So that's a little bit about the process on your income. I would say 95% of the time, my clients will give me their first draft of a DRFA, because I always do have them do the first draft. They will give me their DRFA and they will get their income wrong every time. And it can be the most educated people. They're so educated about their finances. They know exactly what's going on. And we take a look, and it's a great starting point, but we have to come in and fix it. That's most of the time. And then it gets complicated, because how many times a year are you paid? And let's make sure we divide it right, because a really important thing to note is that everything on the DRFA as far as income and expenses is a monthly amount. So you're going to do an average over the year of what all your expenses are and what your income is per month. So the DRFA is looking at what is your gross monthly income, net monthly income, and monthly expenses. And so how many times have you been in court where on the expenses piece, somebody puts a yearly amount in the monthly column, and it's like, so you're telling the court you spend however much per month on whatever it is, cable TV, but really they actually put the yearly amount, and it just makes them look terrible, and it gets their sea legs out from under them when they're on the stand. It's just a disaster. So that's income. It's really, your lawyer needs to help you. They may bring in a forensic accountant, and remember, you have to have documents that back up everything we put on this DRFA. Occasionally we'll do estimates when it comes to expenses, which we'll talk about now, but for income, there has to be evidence surrounding how we reached this income. Same thing really for expenses and assets and debts. Ideally, if we ever present a DRFA, we have all the evidence to back it up, because we would bring that to court, and you really have to. So let's talk about the second component, the expenses, the monthly expenses that go on a DRFA. Talk to us generally about how that looks, how that works.
So ideally, we would love to take a 12-month snapshot of expenses for each category. It's not required, but to get the most accurate view of what you spend, it's good to see it through all 4 seasons, because different utilities are different in summer versus winter and things like that. And so it balances it out throughout the year. I always, if I have a client who is the one that's going to be seeking support, I always tell them that it is vital that we get these expenses as accurate as possible, because this DRFA is a snapshot for the court to look at on somebody's ability to pay and somebody's need when you're talking about
Alimony.
alimony.
Because remember, alimony, the formula for alimony is ability to pay. So if you're the one paying alimony, you need to make sure on your DRFA that your net income, is accurate and that your expenses are accurate and you're not padding your expenses, because the court's going to look at, after their net income and their reasonable expenses, how much do they have left over to pay alimony? That equals ability to pay. And then as Andee said, there's need for alimony. If you're the one seeking alimony, you have to prove that you have a need. And you need to therefore be very accurate with your net income, or if you're not working, the court is going to impute you to an income that you're capable of earning. So that's another topic, but you're also going to need to be very careful with your proposed expenses. It's very common that people pad their expenses and say, it's going to cost me $12,000 a year for vacations. It's going to cost me $3,000 a month for dry cleaning, or whatever it is. And these are very nitty gritty detailed expenses. Every expense you can think of is on these DRFAs. And if you pad that, a judge is going to catch on to it. Again, remember, we really need evidence behind the numbers that we're pulling here. Bank statements, credit card statements, a history. So if you're the one seeking alimony and you are saying your expenses are crazy huge, you are really setting yourself up for failure in front of a judge. They'd rather see something very practical to show what is your actual need. Let me compare it to this person's DRFA, see what's their ability to pay. This one, let me see what they really need. That's going to push the judge to an alimony conclusion.
Yes.
And it's relevant for child support too.
It can be, yes.
Yeah, for expenses.
And not to put too fine a point on it, but this all goes to credibility. Mm-hmm. So what can end up happening is judges see thousands of these domestic relations financial affidavits. So they have a sense, given, sort of where you are, what you pay for your home and that kind of thing, or rent, what things are going to cost you and what's normal. And so if you have fluffed up categories, the risk you run is the judge will just slash the whole category, and then you'll have nothing for dry cleaning. And you may actually have dry cleaning, but if you put something like $1,500 a month, that's not reasonable because you work remotely or something like that. Yeah. The judge will slash the entire thing. And so then they're just cutting down what you need, and without you having a chance to do anything about that. So that goes to credibility. And same thing on the other side. If the payor, the one who may have an obligation, has unnecessarily fluffed up expenses, the judge can come in and say, oh, so you put $1,500 into your 401k every month. However, you don't need to do that right now. Maybe you did that before, but post-divorce, that's not reasonable given the other needs, and they'll slash that. So that can come up in any way. So we look at these when we're helping our clients finalize them and say, you know what? I know that this is what you've been spending in the past, but we need to put something reasonable so that the judge doesn't cut it all together.
Yep. I mean, and it is so something to note and something to be very cognizant of. Let me connect a dot for you. This goes back to the income piece a little bit. Is the incomes that go on these DRFAs are most likely going to be the incomes used on the child support worksheet, meaning the judge will take the number from the DRFA, put it on the child support worksheet. The gross monthly income goes on the child support worksheet as opposed to the net. Net monthly income applies to alimony. Gross monthly income applies to child support. And the court is going to take those numbers and put them right on that child support worksheet, which is then going to spit out a child support number based on what those DRFAs say the incomes are. Unless, of course, the judge finds error, which they do a lot, in what the income is on those DRFAs, and the judge decides to plug numbers in there. So this is all very intimately connected and very important. The DRFA is going to touch kind of every little portion of your case. So be very careful about that. And expenses also do apply to child support. So because there's going to be a component of the expenses on your DRFA that allows you to talk about cost of childcare, cost of tutoring. So if your children have special needs, things like that, it can be incorporated into the child support equation. Just depends on the case. The law has different ways that we do that. And so we have to be very specific about children's expenses as well. So it will heavily impact child support as well. So Andee, also let's go into assets and debts. We're going to list assets and debts on this DRFA. Talk to us about that.
They're broken down like they would be in a marital balance sheet. We've got real property like your home. If you own any other properties, your vehicles. If there's any debt on those, we net that out. Bank accounts, retirement accounts, pretty much everything you can think of. And then we might add things in if you have some sort of unique asset that is not one of the standard ones that's listed. And so on that, and remember, precision is key on the Domestic Relations Financial Affidavit. So if you're somebody who doesn't have all the information about your assets, whereas in expenses, we want to make them as accurate as possible. On assets, we might name a category because we might know that there's an account with Schwab, but we don't have any visibility into it. And so we might name that and say to be determined. And we're very big on putting footnotes and giving as much information as possible, again, because we don't want you to be cross-examined later. But to the extent that we can gather this information and make it as accurate as possible, and we'll put as of, because what you don't want to do is put a value in there and then update it later, and the other side plays that game with cross-examination. So there's ways to, if you don't have all the information, we know how to account for that. The more information you have, the better. And we just document everything to get as accurate a picture as possible so that we can start talking about the marital estate and what we're going to do with it.
Yep. So to add to what Andee said, the marital balance sheet that she's referencing is a separate document that is done usually a little bit later in the case, that all that does is outline assets and debts, and it outlines how do we think we should split the assets and debts, okay? And that marital balance sheet is used for settlement and for trial. A judge is going to look at that and say, all right, based on what I'm seeing on this marital balance sheet and all the evidence I'm seeing, here's how I'm dividing the estate, which again, we are equitable division, which means fair division, which means we don't automatically divide everything 50-50, although our judges usually like to. And that marital balance sheet is usually a little bit more detailed than what we put on the DRFA. And one of the most common mistakes is that people plug in information on the DRFA about their assets and debts that is different than what later goes on that marital balance sheet. Yes. So you have to really let the marital balance sheet shine and let the DRFA just give a summary. And like Andee said, one of the best tools to utilize is saying to be decided about certain assets and debts. The big key there is you always want the DRFA to match precisely the marital balance sheet. So have to be very, very careful there. There's some dangers involved there. And when there's a very complicated estate involved, we're typically going to have a forensic accountant, an expert, assist with creating the marital balance sheet and ensuring that the DRFA and the marital balance sheet jive. So let's quickly talk about timing. We can do a DRFA at the beginning of a case. We can amend it, which is fine if you need to amend it. And sometimes incomes change during a case. Expenses may change during a case. So tell us just generally, what are some guidelines about how you amend your DRFA and when we may do that?
Right. So again, we're required to produce a DRFA 5 days before mediation or a hearing or trial. So let's say we produce one for mediation, it doesn't resolve at mediation, and we go to trial. We're going to be obviously working on it and updating it in order to get it ready for trial, and we're going to amend it at least at that point. But know that we're working on it throughout the case. Like, we're continuing to, as we get more information, kind of perfect it as we go through the case. We don't produce it, like Mali's already said, several times throughout the case unless we have to, but we're always kind of refining it and making sure that it is as accurate as it possibly can be without pinning you into things, especially if it's something that you aren't sure about. There's a way to capture that, to be honest, but also provide as much information and be as transparent as possible.
One of the most common scenarios that I deal with is I take on a client who came from a previous lawyer, and that previous lawyer did a terrible job with the DRFA. And I'm sorry to my fellow lawyer brethren out there, but sometimes y'all really mess it up, dude. You really do. And like, I'll see that there's been a handwritten DRFA that the client thought was correct, and it is all wrong. The income's wrong. The expenses are insane. And I'm like, oh my God. So I'll get involved. We have to redo it, and we'll amend it. and we'll submit the amended one. And when that happens, it's not to panic, because I will coach my client on, well, how do we address that in court? That's important. You've got to do some prep about that, so that the person that's testifying, the client's going to say, okay, that DRFA I did previously, didn't really understand, whatever the facts are. And after going into the documents and the evidence and making sure we did it right, this one is accurate. And so it is, with the proper coaching and an attorney that really gets in there and gets deep with it, you can fix that. So don't panic if you're in that position. And then we've kind of hit on this, but I want to kind of end on this notion of the unknown, okay? If you've never done a budget before, you really don't know what your household expenses are. You don't have access to your bank account, your credit cards. You don't know what expenses are. Or let's say also, like, you're in need of alimony and we need to create expenses for you to show a judge what is your future need for alimony. Like, maybe right now you're still in the marital residence, your spouse is still paying for everything, you have no access, but we know we got to create a future for you. Don't panic. That's an example of, we're going to start somewhere, like Andee said, and then your lawyer's going to help you fill in the gaps. And sometimes what happens is we do some discovery, meaning we get documents in from the other side or from subpoenas from banks themselves, whatever. And we take a look with you at, all right, looks like this is what y'all have been paying for your mortgage. This is what you've been paying for groceries on average, all the things, your cleaning lady, whatever it is. We go through that with you, everything down to even how much is your hair and nails, how much is all, it just depends on your lifestyle. What the court's going to want to look at, what is the lifestyle you've established. Okay, so we can get information to help us paint that picture and help plug those numbers in for you. We can also add line items that are estimates and say, okay, I've done 2 DRFAs before and said, this is what they're spending right now. This is a DRFA that anticipates what our expenses going to look like for this person in the future. We have you do things like research, how much is rent going to cost in the area that you want to live? How much are you looking at spending for a new car if you need to get one, or whatever? A lot of times you can't afford to refinance the loan of your car and keep it. It's in your spouse's name. We got to get rid of the car. A lot of times I see the monthly payments on cars are just exorbitant, unnecessary, and we need to downsize for you. We need to downsize on rent, we need to downsize on a car payment, and just be more practical so we can get you to rebuild and hopefully get you enough assets and debts you can invest and just explode and flourish later. And this goes to what we're saying about, we are looking at a future for you, not looking at what is just right in front of us. We're looking months, years, decades in advance for you in this planning piece that we're using, and it all starts at the DRFA. And it all does. And it starts with a lawyer who's going to be so careful for you, because it's normal that this isn't going to be your forte. That's our job. So anything else, Andee?
No, I think we've said it in several different ways, but again, the key is to have an attorney help you that really understands how important these documents are, and what are the pitfalls that you can inadvertently fall into if it's not handled appropriately. It's definitely not an afterthought, although I think some people look at it that way. And so precision is key.
I love it. And thank you guys so much for giving us your time and sharing your energy with us. We just love you. We love everybody in our wolf pack. And if you're listening, by default, welcome to our wolf pack. And y'all forgive me because I have to look at this information here because I forget every time. This is where you can find us. YouTube, subscribe to us, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. We would love it if you'd engage with us. Leave us comments, questions, tell us things you want us to talk about. Ask us everything. It can be things about our business, about us, about our attorneys, and definitely about family law, anything in the world. You can email us at podcast@hsfamilylaw.com. Same thing. We'd love to hear from you. If you're interested in being a guest on the podcast, let us know. We'd love to have you. Please look for us on Facebook and Instagram at Hastings Shadmary. We'd love to engage with you there as well, and you'll get to see a little bit more about our everyday goings-on in the Wolf Pack at Hastings Shadmary. And let me tell you, it is always quite the exciting show. Every day, something wild. And we love it. And we love y'all. We will see you next time.
See you next time.
The Hastings Shadmary Show is a production of Hastings Shadmary Family Law and 1066 Productions. It is produced by Kendall Walker and Ned Hastings and edited by Ned Hastings.